I had to fall back on poor old PIA, so that brought me here. Anyway, it's been about 6 months that I was given this responsibility. I've been in this position for a year, from 2017 until 18. That was the last year of the PMLN government between 2013 and 18. So the last year, usually the bureaucrats don't take you seriously at all, and you're on your way out. So introducing and carrying out reforms in the last year of a political government's life is extremely hard and difficult. But in that year, we introduced something called the solar net metering systems. It was very hard to get a green meter at that time, and it was just restricted to a few connections, and we wanted to bring about an environment where that part of the power sector could actually proliferate, and renewable energy, and people to get an opportunity to invest into renewable energy and make money out of it, and help the grid actually stabilize and bring in cleaner energy onto the grid's profile. So that's what I did at that time. But when I came back 6 months ago as a power minister, it was much worse. The entire power sector was facing issues that are huge, that would take many years to try to improve or rectify. And those issues are ones that need serious policy interventions and some serious realignment of resources on the national scene. So I'm going to try to, within the next 15 minutes, just identify those key fault lines and the power sector reforms that we've already authored and have embarked upon for you to have a fair idea of what's actually going on. So there are these three distinct areas within the power sector. One is the generation, the other is the transmission, and the third is the distribution system, which is in the form of companies like Electric and Hyderabad Electric Company and Sakhar and Lahore and Multan and Gujranwala, Islamabad, Faisalabad. All these companies form the distribution sector. And then at the helm of affairs is the power division itself. Unfortunately, the first reform that needs to be taken is, as far as the working of the power sector itself is concerned, the power division itself. So the policy makers in the past have had no or almost negligible help in the form of technical professionals who are good at advising the power division on what kind of policy interventions to make. So we have additional secretaries, we have the secretary, we have joint secretaries, and we have the head of the ministry in the form of a political individual or a technocrat who comes in and acts as a minister. So these people have to make serious decisions which would impact the growth of the power sector, the direction it's supposed to be taking, the competition that is supposed to be brought about in the power sector. And unfortunately, the power division itself has had no such expertise in the past. So what we've decided to do is, we've decided to form this company which is in place called PPMC. And this would, in the next 6 to 8 months, be housing the best of the best in the world as far as technocrats are concerned, who would be working on all sorts of numbers. So the power sector is basically all about numbers. What happens if you make this intervention? What impact would it have on the cost of generation, the cost of transmission, the cost of distribution? What happens if you realign the energy mix? What happens if you increase the capacity payments, make new investments? What happens to the interest rates? What happens to rupee and... That's not me. So the power division has actually started doing that, and we've already started recruiting people through the World Bank process who are giving us very concrete and substantial advice in terms of numbers, and there has to be financial modeling done for every kind of an incentive that you provide for the industry. So just giving you an example, the winter incentive tariff that could encourage the demand in the winters to grow higher than what it is right now for industrialization to take place, that's all about numbers. So what happens, there are these transmission constraints and there are the energy mixes and which plant gets dispatched when. So such technical people need to give us real numbers according to which we need to make policy interventions. So first of all, the power sector itself, the power division itself has realized that we do not have the capacity to do such work. So we've hired many people as we speak. We've already gone through the hiring process, but we're also establishing and laying the foundations of an institution that would be the technical arm of the power division for times to come. And this, in my humble opinion, would make a huge difference and would add value to the policy making process of this very technical power division. The other constraints or the fault lines are the south-north transmission constraints. So we have a transmission system, a national transmission system. This transmission system is inefficient. The kind of rollout of projects that it goes through, inefficient. A project that's supposed to be completed in 18 months, it takes 6.5, 7, 8, 10 years to do. Right now in your country and in our country, there is cheap energy available in the south, here around Karachi, that we can't transmit to the load centers of this country, and we have to bear the cost of utilizing the expensive power being produced up in the north to these industrial centers, which is adding a lot of burden on the overall pool price of energy across the country. So the transmission constraints is something very serious that we are facing right now. Thank God, by the grace of God, we've already been able to identify these constraints in the past 6 months, and good development partners like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank and others have already committed to financing these constraints in the next 2 years. So Pakistan should be out of the national transmission constraint part of the fault line that is very serious within the next 2 years. We're well on our way in order to do that, and this should be over in the next 2 years. The other is the horrible state of affairs that our distribution companies are in. So Sakhar Electric Company and Hyderabad and Lahore, they used to support a political economy. So there used to be a whole political economy around it. And that was because of the inefficiencies that the discos had. People used to complain to constituency politicians like myself. We used to go around and say, I want my XCN so that all the complaints that people are bringing to me need to be resolved. There wasn't a complaints service delivery mechanism in these companies. The typical government-run bad governance, bad weak boards that were put in place because of political considerations. So in the past 6 months, this government, in spite of being a very active political one, and we hold a lot of excess baggage of the past, we've been able to resist this political economy. And right now, other than the 2 synth companies, which would also be put in order very soon, the rest of the 9 distribution companies, we have the most professional and able professionals of this country that have been installed as members of the board of all these companies. And we've completely isolated ourselves from these companies and completely detached ourselves. So there is no additional secretary and minister and secretary who's giving any instructions to these boards on what to do and what not to do. They've already made out a plan, and in the past 3 months, we've seen a fair reduction in the theft and the losses that these companies used to face. And the IMF and all other business partners and development partners of ours are extremely happy and content with the kind of reforms that are happening within these distribution companies. This will save you and your country and ours more than 500 billion rupees in subsidies that we have to finance through the finance ministry, and pull that money out of the development sector and bear the consequences of the theft and the losses that these companies face. Along with that, the Privatization Commission has already been handed over 3 companies from amongst 10 that are going to be privatized by May next year. So the financial advisors are in place, are about to be in place in the next 1 month by the Privatization Commission. So by the end of next year, out of the 10 companies that Pakistan has, more than 7 of these companies would have been privatized, and privatized in a much healthier manner than we've seen in the past. So the KE privatization is not an ideal one. Is it an ideal one? Are you enjoying K Electric's services in this country, in this city? No. He just told me that you'll be a very popular man if you talk against Karachi Electric. So we are trying to learn from that, and we've gone through the learning curve, and hopefully the next privatization process will bring about private sector entities that will be far more efficient than Karachi Electric has been in the past. Pakistan is also facing a very serious issue as far as IPPs are concerned. So we have this constraint on us about how we are supposed to hold the sanctity of our existing contracts and not be unfair to the investors, and yet bring about an environment where IPPs could review the contracts that they have with us. The contracts signed with the IPPs in the past have not been efficient. I'll be very frank in saying that. The kinds of returns that they've earned, the kinds of operation and maintenance cost that they are being paid by us, they are not competitive. They're not regionally competitive, they're not nationally competitive, and hence we need to review the contracts that we've gone in with these IPPs in the past. We'll have to do it with mutual consent. This can't be one-sided, otherwise we'll face international litigation. That's something Pakistan can't afford. Since we're going into a very aggressive privatization process, we would want the investors to feel comfortable enough in investing into Pakistan, but we've started the negotiations, and we plan in the next 1 month or so to arrive at a point where the entire generation profile in Pakistan, which is categorized into 3 parts. One are the plants, which are about 70% of the capacity, that are owned by us, which is the government of Pakistan. Their return on equity needs to be rationalized. So they're earning a lot more profits than they should. We need to ask them to forego that in order for that to have a good impact on the pricing structure of of electricity itself. Then the next category is the ones in the form of wind and solar plants that were invested into all the way from 2002 until 2016. We've also engaged with them, and we are going to talk about trying to bring down and change the environment of take and pay, take or pay, to take and pay, so that we get to utilize the power as much as we want, whenever there is a demand on the grid, and not pay for the rest of the capacity. So this is also going to have a negative impact on the price, and the price will come down. The third part is some of the plants that we do not require anymore. So nobody had ever before sat down and done proper research and analyzed each and every generation plant, which we've done in the past 5-6 months now. And we're going to be talking to every plant, including the government plants, to review their contracts and to bring down the price of power by a good 2.5 to 3 rupees per unit. So this reviewing of the IPP contracts would actually harvest a good 2 to 3 rupees for you in the within the next few months. Other than the IPPs, we have other serious issues, like our national transmission company, the NTDC. There has to be restructuring out there. So there are these 11 or 12,000 employees typically working in a government-controlled environment. So we are splitting that NTDC up into 3 pieces. One is going to form the independent system market operator. This is the key reform that this government has taken upon itself. So from, say, about 2-3 years from now, we are seeing or we are wanting to move towards an environment where there is no single buyer of energy in the market. So right now, all the energy is bought by the government of Pakistan. And we put it in this pool and just transmit it all throughout the distribution system. Who is the government of Pakistan to be committing to buying power in the future? How can we take the risk of whether the economy will grow at 4% or 3% or 6%, whether the demand of power will go higher by 4% to 2% or 3%? It's not up to us to do that. So let the market forces start buying and selling power and producing power amongst themselves. So there needs to be an exchange for electricity units, like we have the stock exchange and the commodity exchange, where people buy and sell energy amongst themselves, and the best market price actually prevails. And that's how you achieve efficiencies within the electricity generation system. So this CTBCM, which will come into place, this is a competitive market environment, this will come into place once this independent system market operator is in place. So this ISMO, the market operator, should be in place within the next 2 to 3 weeks. It took a lot of hard work in the past 6 months for this to happen. Now the NTDC, one part of NTDC which is supposed to be planning for the future. How much power do I want? What part of the country do I need this power in? Should it be renewable? Should it be solar, wind, hydel, coal-based, nuclear? What kind of power do I want? Has there been ever an exercise in Pakistan which has added on power to the generation profile on a least cost basis? My dear students, no. The answer is no. Unfortunately, in our country, never ever before have we added on power to the system on a least cost methodology. That's why power is expensive. Power is expensive because we never planned and never made the policies to do it in that manner. Every time we were in a rush, the country is facing load shedding. Let's add on power in the next 2 years. So there have been these spurts of addition of power in the past 3 to 4 decades. This has been the root cause of why power is expensive today. In addition to this, the devaluation of the rupee and the higher interest rates ever since 2018 and 19 and 20, that have been the major cause of rise in electricity prices. So the so-called capacity payment that you talk about, this capacity payment includes debt servicing and the principal of the debt being paid. So the rupee was 100 rupees to $1 when all CPAC plants was signed off. It's gone up to about 300 rupees. So who gets to pay for this devaluation? The consumers do. So Pakistan has faced a kind of and we need to recognize these investments as a kind of a sunk cost to be able to get out of the so-called zombie sector syndrome. So that's precisely what we are wanting to do. We are wanting to restructure our circular debt part. The circular debt of 2.4 trillion rupees has a financing cost of 2.8 or 3 rupees per unit that you and I have to pay in our bills every month. So just servicing that circular debt, taken at high interest rate or costs, is actually adding on that burden onto the consumers. So this needs to be nationalized. This debt needs to come out of the tariff structure, needs to be nationalized, and needs to be taken on more efficient and much better terms. So the financial restructuring of the sector is also taking place as we speak. So we're looking at the whole landscape of the power sector in a very holistic and proper manner. Every policy intervention has an implication on the other. So the finance ministry and myself, we are both working very closely together. The Chinese have given us tremendous support. No matter how much people criticize the CPEC energy projects and the share they have in the capacity payments, there wasn't anybody investing at that time into Pakistan. So it was very good of them to come and invest. They came and invested on terms that were offered to the rest of the world by our country. Nobody accepted those. The Chinese did. They made a strategic decision. They asked their banks to finance, they asked their investors to invest, and we came up with all these plants. So it was the rupee devaluation that hit us the most and the higher interest rates. I'd like to just say in the end, and then other issues could be raised by the moderator and yourselves in your question and answer session in case I haven't been able to cover those. We have already committed to an additional 27,000 megawatts of power that is to be added until the year 2034. Do you know that out of those 27,000 megawatts that we've already committed, they've already started construction of those power plants, which are mostly hydel. I think 95% are hydel. Do you know that they're all, again, not on a least cost basis? If you put in the data of all these new plants coming in the next 10 years, only 87 megawatts out of the 27,000 megawatts actually qualify on a least cost basis by a specialized software that is supposed to be carrying out all this planning and giving the policy makers the option to either choose one way or the other. That is scary. That is actually scary. And that is what we have reopened in the corridors of policy making at the Power Division, whether we should go ahead with this or not. Whether we should go ahead with the Bhasha Dam's electricity producing part or not. The water part is very important. So the dam needs to be made. Climate change risks need to be mitigated. But do I need to put in 1.4 trillion rupees into a power generation turbines of the Bhasha Dam and then further add on another $3 billion worth of a transmission line to evacuate that power? To do what? To give you more expensive electricity. Does that make sense? No. So these are the kind of questions. It's not just the previous IPPs that we are looking at. We are also analyzing each and every additional plant that is supposed to be coming on to the national grid in the next 8 to 10 years. So that when you're 10 years older than what you are right now and you're good, successful businessmen and professionals working in your respective fields, you need to have access to regionally competitive power. So these are the bad sides of it or the fault lines. Thank God we've already recognized these for the first time. Such a holistically approached strategy is being conducted in the Power Division for the first time in Pakistan's history. And I'm grateful to professionals who are actually helping us do that. So there is the light at the end of the tunnel, and we are seriously contemplating, and we're very realistically expecting that within the next year or year and a half, this will happen gradually. So there isn't any one factor. जिसको आप हटा दें ना तो सीधा 10 रुपए बिजली की कीमत नीचे हो जाएगी. There isn't one factor to it. So there are 8 or 10 different power sector reforms that need to be implemented for the 10 to 12 rupees impact to happen so that Pakistan's power tariffs are regionally competitive and the industry can afford to expand on the basis of that regionally competitive power that is provided to them. Lastly, I'd like to, since it's very close to my heart, there is something called an EVG policy, electric vehicle policy, that the government of Pakistan is about to author and announce within the next 1 month. I'm a part of the steering committee which is chaired by the Industries Minister. But as far as our power division is concerned, we were responsible to do two things as a part of the EV policy. One were the EV regulations. So it was just day before yesterday that we have already approved. There are going to be some minor changes that we are making within the next 2 to 3 days, and I'll formally announce it. The first EV regulations of Pakistan for EV charging stations and battery swappable stations. So in every mahalla of Karachi or every 2-3 mahallas, there'll be these small shops that people will be able to rent space and start providing swappable batteries for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. And then the transition from combustion engines to the EV part of transportation will start in a manner that could transform Pakistan. This could really bring down the burden of the fossil fuels that we import from other countries, and Pakistan could be quite self-sufficient. So EV is a part of it which is very close to our hearts and our policy making. So the regulations should be in place in the next 3 to 4 days. Then comes the difficult part. What rates would this electricity be provided to these swappable stations and EV charging stations? That is going to play a very important role in the proliferation of electric vehicles. And that is something that we've already done a lot of work on. And although this comes under the purview of the regulator, but the government plans to give policy guidelines to the regulator, where the regulator could consider to bring down the cost of electricity to the lowest minimum possible, so that it makes sense and it gives enough saving to these 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers to transition from combustion engines to EVs, and that saving is enough for him or her to take a loan and switch from a combustion engine to an electronically driven vehicle. So the EV policy and the EV regulations and the EV part of the pricing of power is something else that we are actually at a very advanced stage, and this country should be enabled enough. I remember when I was the IT and telecommunication minister back in 2002, PTCL's privatization had been a dream for 25 years. It had not happened. All these companies that you enjoy the services of in the sector of telecommunications, they were not there. There wasn't enough competition. We were able to deregulate and privatize the sector, and we're still harvesting the benefits of it. Let's hope we're able to do the same with the power sector, which is a much more difficult task to do, because there's a whole political economy behind it. There are mafias, there's a lot happening, even in the distribution sector itself. So we are looking at it holistically, and hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, you should be proud of the interventions that the power division is expected to take, inshallah. Thank you so much. I apologize for...
हिस्टोरिकल पर्सपेक्टिव से चलते हैं 2011-12-13 में पाकिस्तान में रोज लोड शेडिंग हो रही थी और कैपेसिटी कम थी, डिमांड ज़्यादा थी। फिर 2014 के आसपास सीपेक का प्लान बनता है और उस वक्त से अब तक कैपेसिटी 85% बढ़ जाती है और